Emil Kapaun grew up during the Depression on a small farm near Pilsen, Kansas. Always known as someone who was willing to help others, young Emil did what he could to help his family survive on the flat Kansas plains. In high school, Emil Kapaun, who is also known as Father Kapaun to many in Kansas, began talking about becoming a Catholic priest, and his local priest, Father Sklenar, made arrangements for young Emil to study and eventually become a priest in the Diocese of Wichita.
According to my grandmother, yes, he always did. He always knew that that was going to be his vocation. Even when he was 4 years old, she always tells a story about how he would stack old cardboard boxes and old crates in the living room and drape a towel over the top of the crates and would be trying to say Mass. He'd even use the Latin words, even though he really wasn't sure sometimes of what he was saying. She always knew that that was what he was going to be. It was never a question in her heart, and I don't think it was ever a question in his heart as where he wanted to be and who he was going to be.
Emil Kapaun was ordained a priest in June of 1940 and was assigned to his home church in Pilsen, Kansas. It was during this time that he also began serving Mass for the soldiers at Harrington Air Base, which was close to the town of Pilsen.
It started giving him a bondship of what the guys in the military were, and I think he also saw that there was a lot of lacking for what any kind of spiritual direction they were getting, and I think that's one of the gaps he wanted to fill, and wanted to be one of the people that would help bring these boys back together and bring them closer to God.
The service to these men in uniform would lead him to enter the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps in 1944, and eventually to serve as a chaplain in World War II. In 1945, Father Kapaun was sent to India and served in the Burma theater. Men who served with him said that any time gunfire could be heard, it wouldn't be long before Father Kapaun would arrive by jeep or even bicycle to be alongside them.
The chaplains were never required to be up at the front lines. They were never required to go through the same training and the same work as the regular soldiers. But Father Kapaun was always willing to do that because he wanted to be with the men, because he knew they're the ones that needed him, and that was his purpose for being there.
Father Kapaun returned from World War II in 1946 and continued his education at the Catholic University of America, where he earned a master's degree. He returned home to Kansas and over the next year was assigned to different parishes before asking Bishop Carroll for permission to return to military service. Back in the service and assigned to the Army's 1st Cavalry Division, it wouldn't be long before he would ship out to Japan, en route to the conflict in Korea.
The communist-led North Korean army plunged across the line which separated it from free South Korea.
Father Kapaun was constantly serving the men in his battalion and was known to use the hood of his Jeep as an altar during Mass. Whether he was ministering to the dying, performing baptisms, hearing confessions, or offering communion, Father Kapaun stayed with his men. In October of 1950, Father Kapaun and the 1st Cavalry Division crossed the 38th parallel, the designated boundary of North Korea, and within a month, his battalion found themselves surrounded by a large Chinese and North Korean fighting force at Unsan, North Korea. The Battle of Unsan would come to be known as one of the most devastating U.S. losses of the Korean War.
That's when Chinese forces entered the war with a massive surprise attack. Perhaps 20,000 soldiers pouring down on a few thousand Americans. In the chaos, dodging bullets and explosions, Father Kapaun raced between foxholes, out past the front lines, and into no man's land, dragging the wounded to safety. When his commanders ordered an evacuation, he chose to stay, gathering the injured, tending to their wounds.
They said he had courage that you couldn't believe. When you was in a firefight or something and it was real hot and heavy, he'd be right out there getting the wounded and bringing them back. And he had 2 jeeps shot out from under him. one of his drivers got killed and the other one got captured, I guess, and he never got a scratch.
If you would ask him today, I don't think he would even call it courage. I think he would just say, the guys were out there that needed help and I went and helped them. I wasn't trying to be brave. I wasn't trying to be, had all this gumption inside of me. They just needed help and nobody else was helping them. He was the one who always would do it first and doing it for their benefit and not for his.
When the enemy broke through and the combat was hand to hand, he carried on, comforting the injured and the dying, offering some measure of peace as they left this earth. When enemy forces bore down, it seemed like the end, that these wounded Americans, more than a dozen of them, would be gunned down. But Father Kapaun spotted a wounded Chinese officer. He pleaded with this Chinese officer and convinced him to call out to his fellow Chinese. The shooting stopped, and they negotiated a safe surrender, saving those American lives.
At the same time that Father Kapaun is working to facilitate the surrender of the men he was caring for, close by, Sergeant First Class Herbert Miller is trying to make it to safety when shrapnel from a grenade explodes near his feet and badly injures one of his ankles.
The bottom half of his leg from his knee on down was just in shreds. He said that he was bleeding so much. At first he thought he was going to bleed to death, but so he said he tried to stand up. He said he obviously couldn't stand up on his broken ankle, so he said he just laid there trying to decide what to do.
There was dead Koreans and Chinese there, so where I was laying, I pulled one of them over me. So I laid down there, and I had my arm up like this, and I could see that Korean's boot right there, but he didn't know I was alive. So pretty quick they took off. The Americans chased them out of there, and I just laid there till about, I guess, 2 o'clock in the afternoon or so, and I looked up a ditch, and here was a Chinese officer and a Korean. And the Korean saw that I was alive, so he come down there.
Finally, this Chinese soldier realizes that he's still alive, pulls the bodies off of him, and puts the rifle to Miller's forehead. And there was no hope.
And he stood over me with a gun pointed right at my head. And I figured to myself, well, this is the end of the road right here. And about that time, I saw this soldier coming from across the road there.
Father had already surrendered and was under guard and saw this execution about to take place. So he walked away from his own guards who could have shot him. He just walked away.
He come right straight to where I was, pushed that guy aside. Why that guy never shot him, I'll never know. The Lord must have healed him, because he bent over and picked me up and carried me.
He said, I don't have any idea how he was able to pick me up, but he said he picked me up, and he said he started to carry me.
And I hopped along on one leg, and him with his arm around me. And I found out then that he was a chaplain, and it was Father Kapaun. I didn't know who he was, because his helmet was all dirty, and you couldn't see the cross on it. And when it got dark, he routed us out of there and made us start walking. And Father Kapaun was hanging on to me, helping me along. Sometimes he'd carry me. Sometimes he'd put his arm around me, helping me hop on one leg. Because I didn't have a shoe on my wounded leg, and it was all open. There was no bandage or anything. And that's the way we went from there to prison camp. It was a long journey. But without him, I'd have never made it. God sent that man to me. I know just as well as I was born. If the Lord sent him and he obeyed what the Lord told him, to come straight across there where I was at, there's no other reason, none. Because he could have just well left and went the other way. So I give the Lord all the credit for saving my life, and he obeyed what the Lord told him to do. You'll never find another man like him, not on this side of heaven.
Father